Good morning, you're watching Daybreak live on A News and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at your headlines. Trump threatens a big hit if Tehran does not make a deal, adding the war will be over very soon. China's President Xi Jinping welcomes Putin to Beijing at the start of high-level talks. And Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 19 people in southern Lebanon amid a fragile ceasefire. First this morning, the US Senate has advanced war powers resolution aimed at forcing Donald Trump to end the war in Iran unless he receives congressional authorization to continue it. Now, here's more on that story.
US President Donald Trump has escalated pressure on Iran, warning that the United States could carry out fresh strikes if Tehran refuses to make significant concessions in ongoing negotiations. Trump said he had been close to authorizing a new wave of strikes, but stepped back from the decision. He insisted the conflict would end quickly if a deal is reached, and said oil prices would fall once an agreement is in place.
They end that war very quickly. They want to make a deal so badly. They're tired of this. Should have happened for 47 years. Somebody should have done something about it, and it's going to happen, and it's going to happen fast, and you're going to see oil prices plummet. They're going to come down. There's so much oil out there. They're going to come plummeting down. But even with that, the stock market's at an all-time high.
At a White House briefing, Vice President J.D. Vance said draft agreements continue moving back and forth, but warned the military campaign could resume if diplomacy fails.
Most importantly, who not to call on. We think that we've made a lot of progress. We think the Iranians want to make a deal. The President of the United States has asked us to negotiate in good faith, and that's exactly what we've done. So we're in a pretty good spot here, but there's an option B. And the option B is that we could restart the military campaign to continue to prosecute the case, to continue to try to achieve America's objectives. And we could talk a little bit about what that looks like, but that's not what the president wants, and I don't think it's what the Iranians want either. We have an opportunity here, I think, to reset the relationship that has existed between Iran and the United States for 47 years. That's what the president has asked us to do, and that's what we're going to keep on working at. But it takes two to tango.
In Washington, the US Senate advanced a war powers resolution seeking to limit presidential authority over military operations in Iran. In a narrow procedural vote, 4 Republicans joined Democrats, marking the first time it has moved forward after several failed attempts. The resolution would require congressional approval to continue military action, but it still faces major hurdles in the House and would need a 2/3 majority to survive a presidential veto. The White House says the president's actions are legal as tensions continue between US, Israeli forces and Iran. On the ground, Iran continues to restrict shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, a vital global energy route, while US forces maintain pressure through naval deployments near Iranian waters. Iranian officials have rejected US demands, calling them excessive, and say they will continue to assert their rights over the strategic waterway. The situation remains highly tense, with diplomatic efforts continuing but no clear breakthrough between Washington and Tehran.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to our top story this morning in what Trump has been doing overnight. Trump threatens a big hit if Tehran does not make a deal soon. So as you saw in that report, it's something that Trump has said the US may launch an attack on Tehran if it continues to refuse the significant concessions he wants before a deal can be made in order to stop the war in the Middle East. Now, the US president has called for a fresh wave of strikes, which would have broken the ceasefire in place since last month, but he's decided to hold back and saying that the leaders of Iran were begging him to make a deal, but a new US attack would deliver a big hit in the coming days if something was not reached. And In his own words, Trump said, well, I mean, I'm saying 2 or 3 days, maybe Friday, Saturday, Sunday, something maybe early next week, a limited period of time, because we can't let them have new nuclear weapons, is what Trump said. But what we need to also remember is that Trump has moved back on a number of threats that he has once made about directly targeting Iran, attacking them, and decided to either extend a ceasefire or just stop and take a pause. So we will definitely be watching closely at this, as the two sides are very much at a deadlock. And analysts say that both sides want to avoid a new round of hostilities, but neither are willing to pay the political price of the concessions necessary to secure a peace agreement. Okay, now let's go to our next story this morning, and that's on Al Jazeera. That's in relation to a story that broke on Monday afternoon in regards to the deadly shooting in San Diego in California, and we have now a name of the brave security guard who was shot dead along with 2 other worshippers at San Diego Mosque on Monday. If we can just go to Al Jazeera news website that has that particular story. So yes, I knew him, Amin Abdullah, the hero of the San Diego Mosque shooting. Now, he was able to prevent the attack from being much worse, is what police authorities say. The guard was Amin Abdullah, a father of 8, and it was quoted, it's fair to say his actions were heroic, is what San Diego Police Chief Scott Wall told at a news conference. He also went on to say that he undoubtedly saved lives, and Abdullah, along with 2 others, were killed by yet to be identified teenage attackers who also took their own lives. Now, what he did exactly is what the police say is that the suspects ran past Abdullah at the mosque entrance, and he began shooting, and they then returned with fire, with shooting. And he also enacted a lockdown procedure and is credited with saving numerous lives, because there were 140 children at the school that was in the center at the time when the suspects were running around trying to target a number of civilians in the mosque. Now, the 2 other victims that drew the attention of suspects in the parking lot where they were fatally shot. Now, police chief said that the response that Abdullah initiated undoubtedly pushed the suspects to flee, and he will be praised for the 3 victims deterring additional fatalities. Now, people who knew Abdullah told the US media that he looked after the community. Others have taken to social media to actually describe him as the nicest man you'll ever meet. And the mosque has called him a courageous man who put himself on the line of the safety of others, who even in his last moments did not stop protecting his community, or our community, is what the quote said. So that is the update of this man, Amin Abdullah, who unfortunately has died because of being shot by unidentified teenagers who attacked the San Diego Mosque on Monday late morning. Okay, now let's go to our next headline. That's on the BBC, and that's in relation to what's going on in Lebanon. The headline reads, Lebanon says 19 killed in Israeli airstrikes. What we know is that 10 of those killed included 3 children and 3 women who were killed in a single attack. We know that Lebanon was drawn into the war on the 2nd of March when Iran-backed armed Shia Islamist group Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel in retaliation for the US-Israeli strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader. Now, the latest deaths come less than a week after the US said that Lebanon and Israel had agreed to extend a ceasefire by 45 days, with the two sides set to resume talks next month. But despite the extension, both Israel and Hezbollah have continued to exchange fire regardless of what was currently in place, especially in southern Lebanon. And Israel is saying it's because they are targeting the armed group Hezbollah, but civilians are often being killed between the fighting, which includes women and children. Hezbollah has fired rockets and drones into communities in northern Israel as well, and against Israeli troops occupying parts of southern Lebanon. And on Tuesday, the Israeli military announced that another soldier was killed in an attack by Hezbollah in the southern Lebanon area. Okay, now let's go to our next story this morning, and that's actually on Euronews website in regards to plans that Thailand is bringing in. So the headline reads, Thailand plans to cut visa-free stays for tourists amid crackdown on foreign crime. So Thailand is cutting the length of visa-free stays for tourists from more than 90 countries. So it's a broad range of countries that their visa requirements will change, and that's because it's in an effort to reduce crime involving foreign nationals, officials said on Tuesday. Now, a recent series of high-profile arrests of foreigners, which has included cases linked to drugs offences, sex trafficking and foreigners operating businesses such as hotels and schools without proper permits, have added to the ongoing issue that Thailand is trying to curb. Now, under Thailand's current tourism scheme, travellers from more than 90 countries, including the US, the UK and Europe's 29-nation Schengen area and Australia, are eligible to visit the country up to 60 days without a visa. Now, Thailand's cabinet has approved reducing that amount of time for travellers from those particular countries, and now the new visa-free duration would be decided on a country-by-country basis, with most foreign nationals granted stays of up to 30 days instead of the 90 days that was previously allowed. While some could receive only 15 days. Now, it's a tourist minister who has been able to announce these particular plans and says that tourists will be able to renew visas once by visiting an immigration office, but that has to go through the general procedures that Thailand has in place. Now, the 60 days was automatic, but the renewal will be decided by the officer, and tourists will have to explain why they are staying longer than the advised the proposed amount of time first before their visa can be extended. Now, Thailand was not targeting any specific countries, what it says, but rather individuals abusing the visa system by committing crimes in the country. And just an interesting fact as well to add to this is that tourism in Thailand accounts for more than 10% of its GDP. So they very much appreciate tourists coming to the country to spend their time and their money there. However, they don't like the other side of things, where they've seen crime and a number of disruptive behaviour happening in the country, which is adding to the fact that the visa is longer than it would like. Now, those are your morning press headlines for now. I'm now going to take a short break. When I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Stay with me. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories for the morning. And we head first over to East Asia, where Russian President Vladimir Putin has met Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing, with talks scheduled for later today to focus on trade, energy cooperation, the US-Iran war and Ukraine, as Moscow and Beijing continue to deepen strategic ties. Here's more.
Russian President Vladimir Putin arrived in Beijing on Wednesday for high-level talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping during his 25th official visit. The occasion also marks the 25th anniversary of the Treaty of Good Neighbourliness and Friendly Cooperation between Russia and China. Putin was welcomed with an official ceremony outside the Great Hall of the People before holding high-level talks with Xi. The Russian leader was accompanied by a large delegation that included deputy prime ministers, ministers, and senior business executives. The meeting came just days after US President Donald Trump visited China for separate talks with Xi amid the ongoing US-Iran conflict. Key topics on the agenda included bilateral relations, trade, the US-Iran war, energy cooperation, and the Ukraine conflict. The two leaders are expected to sign a joint statement and several cooperation agreements following the talks. Putin and Xi will also attend the opening ceremony of the Russia-China Years of Education 2026-2027. Putin is later expected to meet Chinese Premier Li Qiang for further discussions on trade and economic cooperation. Economic ties between Moscow and Beijing have expanded rapidly in recent years. Bilateral trade surpassed $240 billion in 2023, while China now purchases nearly half of Russia's crude oil exports, according to recent estimates. The meeting sends a strong signal of deepening coordination between Moscow and Beijing, as both powers seek to reshape global alliances and challenge Western influence during a period of rising international uncertainty.
Now, NATO's military committee brought together defence chiefs from all 32 allies in Brussels on Tuesday for high-level talks on the alliance's security priorities. The meeting focused on strengthening NATO's deterrence and defence posture, as well as preparations for the NATO summit in Turkey in July. A senior NATO commander said European allies and Canada are taking on greater responsibility for conventional defence in Europe, while still relying on critical US capabilities. The meeting concluded with a joint press conference where officials outlined the main outcomes.
And discuss how European allies.
At the same time, as we discuss with the Chief of Defence, we must note that the rate of delivery and fielding of all capabilities necessary for our deterrence and defence require a dramatic increases and improvement. We are not at war, but we are not at peace either. This is why we must redouble our efforts to focus defence investment in accordance with our pledges. In parallel, I call firmly on the defence industry to accelerate production and adapt business model to this imperative. Enough with fragmentation, which could be the main risk when more funds are available. We must sustain this commitment in the long term with the steadiness and consistency, not to be thrown off course by social media or other distractions. This morning, we also reaffirm our continued support to Ukraine and strengthening its armed forces. We are building on our already strong partnership. For example, we recently undertook joint visit to Ukraine and another to the Western Balkans. By aligning complementary efforts, reinforcing one another, together, we can deliver so much more.
Staying on NATO, and tensions with Russia and NATO countries have intensified after Moscow accused Ukraine of planning drone operations from Baltic territory, a claim firmly rejected by Latvia, Ukraine and the US. The remarks made at a UN State Security Council meeting triggered sharp responses, with Western diplomats warning against threats directed at alliance members.
According to the information we received in Russia, Kyiv has no plans to limit itself to the use of the air corridors provided by the Baltic countries. Drones are also planned for launch from these countries' territories. Zelensky convinced Latvia to agree to the operation, stressing that identifying the exact launch site will be impossible. Drone forces have already been sent to Latvia. They are deployed at the Latvian military bases in Adazi, Celia, Lielvārde, Daugavpils and Jēkabpils. I would like to draw attention to all of those who are helping Kyiv and tell them that contemporary intelligence means as such that we can clearly identify drone launch sites. Furthermore, data can be obtained by studying drone wreckage. When Zelensky made an attempt to attack the Russian president's residence in December, and yes, to the permanent representative of Latvia, the foreign intelligence of Russia did say that the coordinates of decision-making centers in Latvia are well known, and membership in NATO will not protect you from retaliation, even if you are a member of NATO.
I wish to thank the permanent representative of the Russian Federation for quoting the very same public statement of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service that I quoted in my speech. This is pure fiction and pure lies, and I will not abuse of the Council members' time in detail debunking these lies. You will receive that in writing. I will just repeat: lies and aggressive disinformation and threats are a sign of despair and weakness. And we have seen similar lies addressed against other members of this council in the previous meetings. So I'm very honored to have the attention drawn to my country.
We reject all the fairy tales that we just heard, also about some Ukrainian soldiers in Latvia. Just stop lying.
Now, Estonia says a NATO fighter jet shot down at a drone that entered its airspace, with officials reporting no damage or casualties. The Romanian F-16 fired a missile after the aircraft was assessed as a potential threat, with debris landing in a remote area. Estonian authorities said the drone was likely Ukrainian, but may have been diverted by Russian electronic jamming during attacks on Russia. Ukraine denied any intention to violate NATO airspace and blamed Moscow for redirecting its drones. Russia has not responded. From London, our correspondent Ollie Barrett has more on the growing pressure facing Keir Starmer as divisions emerge within Labour following the party's poor local election results.
Well, this may have been Keir Starmer's slightly strange second cabinet meeting in a week, by which I mean that last time around we had all sorts of speculation about an imminent leadership challenge against him after that cabinet meeting, in which we're told the leadership issue wasn't actually discussed out loud. His health secretary, Wes Streeting, resigned from cabinet and had a very strong critique of Keir Starmer's premiership so far, and made it very clear that he believes there should be a new leader of the Labour Party and new prime minister. And so this cabinet meeting was kicked off, we understand from officials, by a welcome to the new health secretary, James Murray, who has taken on that position after the resignation of Wes Streeting. But then we're told that the cabinet meeting really focused on what officials call delivery. The Prime Minister, according to officials, told his ministers the government's made really good progress in the first 2 years in office, as indicated by the number of bills passed in the first session. We're told the Prime Minister talked about the National Health Service, about the economy, about GDP numbers that we've seen recently in positive terms as evidence of the government's achievements so far. But all of this with the backdrop of ministers knowing that there may well be an imminent leadership challenge against Keir Starmer if or when Andy Burnham, the former outgoing mayor of Manchester, is able to win the by-election that will take place in the coming weeks in Makerfield in the northwest of England. If Andy Burnham does indeed win that seat for Labour, it is very much expected at that point that he would head to Westminster and soon after try and remove Keir Starmer and replace him. That follows a series of controversies, of missteps, of U-turns by Keir Starmer's government, and dozens of his own MPs calling for him to step aside after a series of disastrous local elections. The opposition parties say the government is causing chaos. They say that Keir Starmer is now effectively leading a lame duck administration. But Keir Starmer, as I say, in this cabinet meeting, trying to put on a brave face, trying to show that his government is still getting on with the job and focused on that key word that's been used several times in the readout from officials today of delivery. Ollie Barrett in London for A News.
The son of Isaac Andic, the founder of fashion group Mango, has been named as a suspect in the investigation into his father's death in 2024. Isaac Andic died in December 2024 after falling more than 100 meters while hiking near Barcelona. The case was first treated as an accident, but was later reclassified as a possible homicide. A family spokesperson said the founder's son, Jonathan Andic, is cooperating with the investigation and called for respect for the presumption of innocence. Mango has so far declined to comment on this. Tensions remain high along the Lebanon-Israel border despite an extended US-brokered ceasefire. Lebanese health officials say Israeli attacks killed at least 19 people on Tuesday, while Israel says it is targeting Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Lebanon. Here's more on that story.
Israeli airstrikes across southern Lebanon killed at least 19 people on Tuesday, including women and children, according to Lebanon's health ministry. The attacks came despite a fragile US-brokered ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah remaining in effect. The deadliest strike targeted a house in the town of Deir Kanun al-Nar in the Tyre district, killing 10 people, among them 3 children and 3 women. Several others were wounded as rescue teams searched through the rubble. Additional airstrikes elsewhere in southern Lebanon killed 9 more people and injured dozens. The Israeli military said it had struck more than 25 Hezbollah-linked sites in southern Lebanon over the past 24 hours, but did not immediately comment on the reported civilian casualties. Lebanon's health ministry says more than 3,000 people have been killed and over 9,000 wounded since the conflict resumed, while more than 1 million people have been displaced across the country. Hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah reignited on March 2nd after Hezbollah launched rockets toward Israel following US-Israeli strikes on Iran. Since then, cross-border violence has continued almost daily, despite ongoing ceasefire efforts led by Washington. Meanwhile, the Israeli military said 1 soldier was killed during operations in southern Lebanon, bringing the number of Israeli troops killed in the conflict to 21. Hezbollah said its fighters clashed with Israeli forces near the border and claimed to have destroyed an Israeli tank.
Israeli forces have intercepted an international aid flotilla heading toward Gaza, with organisers saying at least 2 vessels came under fire and multiple boats were stopped in the eastern Mediterranean. Hundreds of participants were detained, while Israel said no live ammunition was used and no injuries were reported. Authorities say non-lethal measures were used after repeated warnings and reiterated that the naval blockade on Gaza remains in force. Organisers said the mission involved dozens of vessels carrying activists from more than 40 countries. Travellers heading to Thailand might need to pay closer attention to a new set of rules coming soon. Now tourists will have to apply for a visa if they wish to stay in Thailand for more than 30 days. Its government has approved a major revision of its visa exemption policies and are removing the 60-day stay program. It's in order to address security issues, misuse and illegal activities. The move completely scraps the 60-day visa exemption for 93 countries. The changes take effect 15 days after it appears in Thailand's Royal News Gazette. Now, the World Health Organization says it sent 4.7 tons of essential medical supplies to the Democratic Republic of Congo on Monday. The shipment comes after the UN declared the Ebola outbreak in a public health emergency of international concern due to the high risk of the disease spreading beyond the country's borders. The outbreak is suspected to have killed around 136 people in recent weeks, with 8 cases confirmed through laboratory testing and 246 suspected cases reported in the eastern province of Ituri. Now over to West Africa, the Nigerian military, working with the United States, has carried out air and ground operations against Islamic State militants in the country's northeast. The defense headquarters said 175 militants were killed in recent days. The military said the strikes destroyed Islamic State checkpoints, weapons stores, and financial networks. Officials say the operations are part of an ongoing campaign against terrorism in the region. Turning to the Pacific, and a fertilizer shortage linked to the Hormuz crisis is adding pressure on Australian wheat farmers, with some now reducing crops as costs rise and dry conditions threaten production. Here's more.
Australia's wheat belt is heading into a difficult season, with dry weather and rising input costs forcing growers to scale back planting. The pressure comes as disruption around the Strait of Hormuz has affected fertilizer supplies from the Middle East, a key source for Australia's farming sector. In Brocklesby, farmer Justin Everett is cutting his wheat area by half after sharp increases in fuel and fertilizer costs.
Yeah, with the triple whammy of weather, fuel and fertiliser, I think we're likely to see a drop in production right across Australia. I think everyone will be trying to save their money and put it into, just make sure that they can get through to the other end and get to next year and go again. That's the most important bit, is making sure you're right to go next year.
The concern is not limited to one farm. Australia is the world's third largest wheat exporter, and the smaller harvest could tighten global supply and add pressure to prices. Analysts say the country may have up to 10 million tonnes less wheat to ship in the coming season, equal to about 5% of annual global exports. For Everett, the response is already visible across his fields. Some land will be left without crops this season as he looks for ways to limit costs and protect income.
Yep, we've pulled back on our total planting. We're going to let some paddocks just go through with no crop in them. I'll put livestock on those paddocks, and we're going to have a bit more of a livestock focus throughout the year. I think there's potential for more income from the livestock going forward.
Fertiliser remains one of the biggest risks. Australia usually imports more than half of its nitrogen fertilisers from the Middle East, but supply has been disrupted, leaving the country with about 600,000 tonnes less urea than it uses in a typical year. Farmers using less fertiliser this season may save money in the short term, but weaker soil nutrients could make the next planting cycle more difficult.
Now to a quick break. When I return, I'll have the rest of the regional stories and headlines, and we'll be joined by a guest to go through some of those key stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's return to the top stories making its way across the region, and we head first to Azerbaijan and the conference, the forum, the World Urban Forum taking place in Baku. Now Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan are increasingly emerging as central pillars of a wider geopolitical realignment unfolding across Eurasia. And President of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, met with Azerbaijan President Ilham Aliyev at the 13th session of the World Urban Forum. Their meeting reflects far more than ceremonial diplomacy between the two friendly states. And joining me now to discuss this and their meeting is Firdavs Kobilov, Deputy Dean for Scientific and International Cooperation in Tashkent. Welcome to the program.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting.
No problem. My first question is, do you think Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan are positioning themselves as part of a more autonomous Eurasian middle power network capable of balancing multiple global actors?
Yes, the currently trajectory of Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan relations reflect the broader structural transformations taking place in Eurasia. And Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan pursuing as a pragmatic, proactive middle powers, attempting to shape the regional order through diversifications. This corresponds with the scholarly debates called it like middle power balancing or multi-vector foreign policy. And where states...
Oh, hello, Mr. Kobilov, can you hear me?
Such as China, Russia, Europe, and also with Turkey as well. And in this context, we can say that the President Ilham Aliyev and President Shavkat Mirziyoyev are pursuing pragmatic model of the regional autonomy. Azerbaijan already demonstrated that it is balancing power by balancing between Russia and Turkey, West and Central Asia. At the same time, Uzbekistan today is pursuing a regional rapprochement in Central Asia and becoming more regional player, and also trying to pursue a multi-vector foreign policy based on equal, mutual, beneficial cooperation. In these terms, we can say yes.
One of the most significant dimensions of Azerbaijan-Uzbekistan relations is the growing consolidation of the Turkic geopolitical space. Do you think, does that growing alignment signal the gradual emergence of a more coherent Turkic geopolitical bloc?
The consolidation of the Turkic space and ongoing transformation is one of the most long-term developments in Eurasian landscape. And the role of the organization of Turkic states, I think it already demonstrated it's not merely just symbolic organization, but it's gradually evolving beyond the symbolic cultural solidarity into institutionalization and strategic cooperation. Cooperation to then extends into different sectors, including like customs harmonization, energy diplomacy, but also digital governance and education exchanges. This multidimensional integration or cooperation let's say, was by scholars described as a functional regionalism, where practical economic and infrastructure cooperation gradually produce some geopolitical cohesions. And however, it would be premature to describe this organization as a full geopolitical consolidated bloc comparable to European Union or to North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But still today we can see that Turkic world remains highly diverse in their foreign policy, economic cooperation, or their economic capacity is also different. But nevertheless, the direction is clear here, I would say. Institutional density is increasing, elite coordination is deepening. That's why we can say that you have shared strategic narratives and becoming more coherent geopolitically.
Thank you for that. So does Uzbekistan was among the first countries to support redevelopment initiatives in Karabakh. Beyond bilateral solidarity, does Tashkent view participation in Karabakh's reconstruction as part of a broader strategy to expand its economic and diplomatic footprint across the South Caucasus?
Yes, I think it carries both symbolic and strategic significance. Uzbekistan's or Tashkent's early participation in post-conflict reconstruction, it's not only about bilateral solidarity between these countries, but also Uzbekistan. It reflects Uzbekistan's broader foreign policy evolution toward proactive regional engagement. And by participating in this processes, Uzbekistan is trying to deepen and strengthen its relations with Azerbaijan. Participating in Karabakh allows Tashkent to deepen these ties and at the same time integrating itself to Trans-Caspian Economic Corridor. Therefore, Tashkent's, I would say, engagement should be understood not only as a bilateral solidarity or cooperation, but also it's a part of a wider strategy of Uzbekistan's multi-vector foreign policy.
As global supply chains continue fragmenting amid geopolitical tensions, do you think Baku and Tashkent emerge as critical transit coordinators connecting Central Asia, Europe, and the Middle East markets?
Indeed, energy and also infrastructure diplomacy are rapidly becoming backbone of the Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan's strategic cooperation. The fragmentation of the global supply chains and also the geopolitical consequences of ongoing conflicts, growing competition over trade corridors have dramatically increased the importance of these transit states, including Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan. In this environment, I would say Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan occupy highly strategic, geostrategic importance in Eurasia. Azerbaijan functions as a gateway between Europe and the Caspian Basin, while Uzbekistan represents one of the largest economies in Central Asia with the largest population. If current trends continue, Baku and Tashkent, I would think that they could indeed emerge as a key transit coordinators linking Central Asia with the South Caucasus and also with Europe as well. This would significantly elevate their capacity for strategic importance within the evolving new Eurasian order.
Now, Baku is promoting itself as a Eurasian logistics and diplomatic hub, while Tashkent accelerates large-scale economic modernization. Do you think both governments are increasingly using urban development itself as a form of geopolitical statecraft?
Yes, the timing of the President Mirziyoyev's visit during the World Urban Forum is highly symbolic, but at the same time, with the description of the geoeconomics concept, we can say that today modern cities are not only merely economic centers. Today they play also instruments of the diplomatic branding, technological competition, and also strategic influence. Where infrastructure, urban development, and connectivity becomes very strategic tools in their foreign policy. So smart infrastructure projects, industrial zones, and the transport corridors play a crucial role in this term. Therefore, both our governments increasingly trying to use this urban development not only for domestic economic development, but also as a diplomatic tool for projecting regional stability and also for modernity and geopolitical relevance.
And finally, the expanding partnership between Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan may reflect, do you think, a broader shift across Eurasia? Could the Baku-Tashkent become one of the defining strategic partnerships shaping the future of the Turkic and Caspian regions?
What makes a partnership particularly quite important, it is very diverse in terms of including several sectors where these two countries are cooperating today. For example, if we call this energy diplomacy, transit, geopolitical, several strategic dimensions simultaneously changing this relationship and this institutional cooperation within the Turkic framework can play a very crucial role. More broadly, Eurasia is moving away from a rigid bloc. It's becoming more institutionalized, and countries, member states are cooperating in diverse sectors. So Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan, I think Azerbaijan is located strategic location within the South Caspian, who can play like linking bridge between Central Asia and Europe, and also Uzbekistan can play a crucial role in Turkic world in Central Asia. That's why from these perspectives we can say these countries can play a crucial role in shaping not only Turkic world but also the Caspian region.
Yes, well, as you mentioned, it's very key to have both these nations come together in that strong partnership. And Uzbekistan coming over to Baku for the Urban World Forum, for the World Urban Forum, is definitely a signifier of that relationship. So thank you so much for joining me and explaining that, Mr. Kobilov. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now we head over to Turkey, and Turkey and the European Union have reaffirmed their commitment to strengthening ties following a phone conversation between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. During the talks, the sides discussed Turkey-EU relations, regional developments and global issues. Von der Leyen described the discussions as productive and underlined Turkey's strategic importance, calling it a key partner in a tense region. The conversation also touched on the Iran issue, with appreciation expressed for Turkey's role in reducing tensions and supporting diplomatic efforts. A car bomb exploded near Syria's defense ministry building in Damascus, killing one soldier and injuring at least 18 people, authorities say. According to military officials, the blast happened in the eastern part of the city while soldiers were trying to dismantle another explosive device nearby. Head of Syria's Ambulance and Emergency Directorate told state news agency that the injured had been taken to hospital. No group has far claimed responsibility for the attack. Now there's a change behind me because we are now heading to the World Urban Forum, and what's been going on now, because Baku has been hosting it at the Olympic Stadium. Sessions have highlighted a number of key issues on connectivity and post-conflict reconstruction, and also marked a major partnership milestone between Turkey and Azerbaijan. Here's the report.
The 13th session of the World Urban Forum in Baku focused on post-conflict reconstruction as a foundation for regional stability. Under the theme, Cities at the Heart of Connectivity, Azerbaijan's leadership detailed a multi-billion-dollar blueprint for integration. Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov framed the transformation of former conflict zones into economic hubs as a core part of the country's peace strategy.
By investing close to $15 billion in the former conflict zone, Azerbaijan has also demonstrated its genuine interest in closing the chapter of confrontation in the region. In other words, massive post-conflict reconstruction efforts of Azerbaijan should also be seen as an integral part of our peace-building strategy.
The regional rebuilding effort covers over 13,000 square kilometers, targeting the long-term resettlement of more than 1 million people.
The liberated territories cover approximately 13,600 square kilometers, and includes 12 cities as well as nearly 300 villages and settlements with the projected population of around 1.1 million people. The general plan therefore established a coordinated framework linking urban development, transport infrastructure, economic activity, environmental systems and rural settlements across Karabakh and East Zangezur.
Beyond newly built zones, major infrastructure upgrades are shaping existing hubs, with Baku utilizing big data through a digital twin model to optimize urban mobility.
We came up with an idea of building the Baku city's digital twin. I mean, maybe in some other societies it would have not been that much possible. Without going to the personal details of our citizens, we have managed to build the lake consisting of 10 billion unique data. We collected the data from mobile operators, we collected the data from the utility companies, we collected the data from the waste, we collected the data from the monitors of our surveillance, from our Ministry of Internal Affairs. And this kind of tool allows us to make the decision.
This modernization aligns with a comprehensive climate strategy to transition the reconstructed territories into fully decarbonized green energy zones.
President Ilham Aliyev's declaration of Karabakh and East Zangezur as a green energy zone with a 2050 net zero target is a manifestation of precisely this strategic vision. In these territories, 38 hydropower plants with a total capacity of 307 megawatt are currently in operation.
Furthering this cross-border cooperation, a memorandum of understanding was signed at the forum, officially making Azerbaijan's Shusha and Turkey's Trabzon twin cities. The document was finalized by Shusha's presidential special representative Aydin Karimov and Trabzon mayor Ahmet Metin Genç.
Staying on the forum, a joint event called the D8 High-Level Dialogue on Energy and Urban Planning also took place. And Azerbaijan Energy Minister Pervez Shabazov said cities consume nearly 70% of global energy and stressed the growing importance of green and smart cities for D8 countries. He noted that Baku's expansion of its green energy projects with 12 new solar and wind power plants set to begin operating next year. The event also highlighted green energy zones projects in Karabakh and East Zangezur, where smart village and smart city initiatives are underway. Turning to the climate resilient cities and communities across the Caspian region, experts came together for talks on the future of urban development at the forum. Speakers focus on climate resilience, financing and regional partnerships, highlighting ways to support sustainable and people-centered cities. Several experts also shared their perspectives on the role of cooperation and innovation in building stronger communities.
In fact, an adaptation fund project that looks at strengthening the resilience of communities, strengthening biodiversity, livelihoods, but also looking at infrastructure pilot projects that can go to scale across the whole country and the wider region. So I have been working actually with the colleagues from UNEP, the Environmental Programme, and the International Organization of Migration on developing such a project for the Caspian Sea shore, but we are also aiming to actually use the experiences that we will be having here in Azerbaijan to go to scale in Kazakhstan and in Turkmenistan.
The first point is some of the basic infrastructure needs to be financed by the public sector. Let's say, for example, like roads, urban flood management systems, those do not generate revenue. But once those infrastructure is in place, some other infrastructure, let's say water supply systems, social housing or wastewater systems, if you properly structure the projects, then it can be pursued for the public-private partnership arrangement. So once that enabling framework is in place, then in the future, the more private capital can come in to the climate-resilient urban infrastructure.
The project that we're working here is enabled by the Adaptation Fund, which has provided to Azerbaijan $10 million to implement the project. around the climate resilience in the country. So we are envisaging, for instance, a corridor development project here in Baku to create public space, but also in the meanwhile to create a buffer area to better deal with emergencies such as urban flooding that we have witnessed. So eventually, the ambition is to bring this project to another level and inspire other players in the region of the Caspian Sea so that more countries can join this effort of creating climate resilience around the Caspian region.
It's now time for a break. When I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Don't go anywhere. Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'm Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at your headlines. Trump threatens a big hit if Tehran does not make a deal, adding that the war will be over very soon. China's President Xi Jinping welcomes Putin in Beijing at a start of the high-level talks. And Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 19 people in southern Lebanon amid a fragile ceasefire. Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to what's going on the Washington Post in relation to the US, because it's saying the Trump administration is expected to reduce the number of troops available to NATO for fighting wars. The headline reads, Pentagon says US will cut thousands of troops from Europe. Now, they want to cut this down, available to NATO for fighting wars and responding to major crises. Now, officials will tell European allies this week that the US will shrink its commitment to the NATO force model, the pool of forces available to repel an attack on a member state, according to Reuters. Now, the announcement will be made at the meeting of the NATO defense policy chiefs in Brussels on Friday. The news agency has reported, and just a reminder, President Donald Trump previously actually ordered the withdrawal of 5,000 troops from Germany earlier this month, and the Pentagon cancelled the deployment of 4,000 soldiers to Poland just recently. Now, Trump has suggested he could pull troops from Italy, Spain as well, and recently said, when asked about the possibility, his words were, yeah, probably, I probably will, why shouldn't I? Italy has not been of any help to us, and Spain has been horrible, absolutely horrible, is what he said. Now, the last thing just to add here is that there are about 36,000 troops in Germany, 12,500 troops in Italy, and 10,000 in Poland, and 3,500 in Spain currently. We do not know how the numbers will divide when Trump wants to take out a number of troops, but we will keep you updated on those figures. Okay, now let's move to our next story, which is on the BBC website in relation to what's going on in Thailand. And the headline reads, Thailand cuts visa-free stay period for more than 90 countries, including the UK and a number of others. Now, Thailand is cutting the length of visa-free stays for tourists from more than 90 countries in an effort to reduce crime involving foreign nationals, officials have said. Now, a recent series of high-profile arrests of foreigners has included cases linked to drug offences, sex trafficking, and foreigners operating businesses such as hotels and schools without a proper permit. Now, under Thailand's current tourism scheme, travellers from more than 90 countries, including the US, UK, and Europe's 29-nation Schengen area and Australia, are eligible to actually stay in the country for 60 days without a visa. Thailand's cabinet now has approved a new law reducing visa-free stays for travellers from those countries. Now, what will change is that these new visa-free durations would be decided on by country basis, with most foreign nationals granted stays of up to 30 days visa-free, and anything over that they'll have to seek further approval and a reason as to why they want to stay longer in the country. Now, the 60 days was automatic, but the renewal has been decided by the officers and tourist team to state that they need more information as to why some nationals may want to stay longer in the country. Now, Thailand says that it's not targeting any specific country, but rather individuals abusing the visa system by committing crimes in the country. And just an interesting fact about tourism in the country, that actually accounts for more than 10% of Thailand's GDP. So it's something Thailand very much appreciates, but they're trying to curb the amount of crime they're seeing from foreign nationals. Okay, now let's go over to the next story this morning, and that's on the Guardian website, and that's in relation to Trump, and Trump threatens a big hit if Tehran does not make a deal soon. Donald Trump has said overnight that the US may launch new attacks if Tehran continues to refuse the significant concessions he wants before a deal can be struck in order to end the war in the Middle East. President Trump called off fresh wave of strikes very recently, which would have brought the ceasefire in place broken the ceasefire, which was currently in place since early last month. Trump has said that Iran's leaders are actually begging to make a deal, but the US attack would deliver a big hit in the coming days if something was not reached. We know that Trump is very big on Iran not having nuclear powers or a nuclear program, which is something Iran has pushed back on multiple times. Now let's go to our Washington correspondent with more information on this story.
President Trump told reporters on Tuesday that he was on the cusp of ordering renewed strikes against Iran's military facilities, but he decided at the last minute to delay. Trump posted on social media that he decided to postpone the military strikes following consultations with Arabian Gulf leaders who had reportedly urged the president to give more time for the peace negotiations. President Trump said that he would wait until later this week to assess whether talks were sufficiently progressing. And he warned that he could order the resumption of military operations if he is not satisfied with the pace of the talks. President Trump met with his national security team on Monday to discuss details on what a military operation could look like. America's Gulf allies are reportedly concerned that Iran may target their energy and water desalination plants if war breaks out again. And in a press briefing at the White House, J.D. Vance said that the administration continues to believe that internal fractures within Iran's political and military leadership make Tehran's negotiating position and what Iranian leaders are attempting to accomplish unclear for the Americans. The vice president said that the part of the problem may be due to muddied communications among the various power centers in Tehran, with many senior leaders continuing to hide underground in anticipation of breakout of conflict. Amube Shabander, A News, Washington.
Estonia says a NATO fighter jet shot down a drone that entered its airspace, with officials reporting no damage or casualties. The Romanian F-16 fired a missile after the aircraft was assessed as a potential threat, with debris landing in a remote area. Estonian authorities said the drone was likely Ukrainian, but may have been diverted by Russian electronic jamming during attacks on Russia. Ukraine denied any intention to violate NATO airspace and blamed Moscow for redirecting its drones. Russia has not yet responded. Russian President Vladimir Putin has met Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing, with talks scheduled for later today to focus on trade, energy cooperation, the US-Iran war and Ukraine, as Moscow and Beijing continue to deepen strategic ties. Here's more.
Russian President Vladimir Putin arrived in Beijing on Wednesday for high-level talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping during his 25th official visit. The occasion also marks the 25th anniversary of the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation between Russia and China. Putin was welcomed with an official ceremony outside the Great Hall of the People before holding high-level talks with Xi. The Russian leader was accompanied by a large delegation that included deputy prime ministers, ministers, and senior business executives. The meeting came just days after US President Donald Trump visited China for separate talks with Xi amid the ongoing US-Iran conflict. Key topics on the agenda included bilateral relations, trade, the US-Iran war, energy cooperation, and the Ukraine conflict. The two leaders are expected to sign a joint statement and several cooperation agreements following the talks. Putin and Xi will also attend the opening ceremony of the Russia-China Years of Education 2026-2027. Putin is later expected to meet Chinese Premier Li Qiang for further discussions on trade and economic cooperation. Economic ties between Moscow and Beijing have expanded rapidly in recent years. Bilateral trade surpassed $240 billion in 2023, while China now purchases nearly half of Russia's crude oil exports, according to recent estimates. The meeting sends a strong signal of deepening coordination between Moscow and Beijing, as both powers seek to reshape global alliances and challenge Western influence during a period of rising international uncertainty.
Hungary's new Prime Minister, Peter Magyar, is in Poland for his first foreign trip since taking office, in a visit that could reset ties after years of tensions under Viktor Orban. Anita Sharma, our correspondent from the Netherlands, reports.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Hungary's new Prime Minister, Peter Magyar, is in Poland, just 11 days into office for his first foreign trip. His meeting with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk could mark a major reset in Central Europe after years of tension under Viktor Orban. Magyar said the two countries must go back to normality, talk to each other, and focus on what they have in common. Under Orban, the once close Warsaw-Budapest alliance fractured over Russia, Ukraine, and rule of law disputes. Magyar is trying to rebuild that relationship, but on very different terms. Top of the agenda, Ukraine, EU relations, and energy. On Ukraine, Hungary approved major EU aid for Kyiv, but Orban's government often delayed or threatened to veto sanctions and other key measures in standoffs with Brussels. Tusk will look for signs that Hungary can be a more predictable partner. Magyar promised a reset with Brussels, but Tusk will want to know if that means a genuine shift in Hungary's EU posture or simply a change in tone. Magyar wants frozen EU funds unlocked, critical for Hungary's economy and defense ambitions. On energy, Magyar pledged to end Hungary's reliance on Russian supplies by 2035. With Poland emerging as a major regional LNG gateway, new routes could help Hungary diversify, including access to U.S. gas. There was symbolism from the start. Magyar arriving in Warsaw from Krakow by high-speed rail, joking that the line was built with, quote, EU money from the evil Brussels, a pointed jab at Orban's anti-Brussels rhetoric. If this visit delivers, it won't just reset ties, it could redraw Central Europe's political map. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now, the son of Isaac Andic, the founder of fashion group Mango, has been named as a suspect in the investigation into his father's death in 2024. Isaac Andic died 2 years ago after falling more than 100 meters while hiking near Barcelona. The case was first treated as an accident, but was later reclassified as a possible homicide. A family spokesperson said the founder's son, Jonathan Andic, is cooperating with the investigation and called for respect for the presumption of innocence. Mango, the store, has declined so far to comment. US State Secretary Marco Rubio will travel to Sweden and India this week for talks focused on NATO priorities, Arctic security and strengthening bilateral relations, according to the State Department. In Sweden, Rubio will attend a NATO foreign ministers meeting in Helsingborg, where he is expected to push for increased defense spending and greater burden sharing among allies. He will later visit India with stops in several major cities for talks on trade, energy security and defense cooperation. cooperation, as well as engagements with senior Indian officials and partners.
The normalizing of their controlling of international waterways is both illegal and
Turning to the Middle East now, and tensions remain high along the Lebanon-Israel border, despite an extended US-brokered ceasefire. Lebanese health officials say Israeli airstrikes killed at least 19 people on Tuesday, while Israel says it is targeting Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Lebanon. Here's this report.
Israeli airstrikes across southern Lebanon killed at least 19 people on Tuesday, including women and children, according to Lebanon's health ministry. The attacks came despite a fragile US-brokered ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah remaining in effect. The deadliest strike targeted a house in the town of Deir Kanun al-Nar in the Tyre district, killing 10 people, among them 3 children and 3 women. Several others were wounded as rescue teams searched through the rubble. Additional airstrikes elsewhere in southern Lebanon killed 9 more people and injured dozens. The Israeli military said it had struck more than 25 Hezbollah-linked sites in southern Lebanon over the past 24 hours, but did not immediately comment on the reported civilian casualties. Lebanon's health ministry says more than 3,000 people have been killed and over 9,000 wounded since the conflict resumed, while more than 1 million people have been displaced across the country. Hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah reignited on March 2nd after Hezbollah launched rockets toward Israel following US-Israeli strikes on Iran. Since then, cross-border violence has continued almost daily, despite ongoing ceasefire efforts led by Washington. Meanwhile, the Israeli military said 1 soldier was killed during operations in southern Lebanon, bringing the number of Israeli troops killed in the conflict to 21. Hezbollah said its fighters clashed with Israeli forces near the border and claimed to have destroyed an Israeli tank.
Staying in the Middle East, Israeli forces have intercepted an international aid flotilla heading toward Gaza, with organisers saying at least 2 vessels came under fire and multiple boats were stopped in the eastern Mediterranean. Hundreds of participants were detained, while Israel said no live ammunition was used and no injuries were reported. Authorities said non-lethal measures were used after repeated warnings and reiterated that the naval blockade on Gaza remains in force. Organisers said the mission involved dozens of vessels carrying activists from more than 40 countries. Now over to the continent of Africa, and a shipping company is looking to establish a logistics route that would see goods reach the Suez Canal before being transported to Europe and North Africa. This comes as the closure of the Strait of Hormuz continues to impact global shipping. Here's more.
Global shipping companies are seeking alternative routes to transport goods as disruptions continue at the Strait of Hormuz. One shipping company is working to establish a logistics route, transporting goods from Gulf Cooperation Council nations overland through Saudi Arabia and Jordan to the Red Sea. From there, shipments are moved through the Suez Canal to Europe and North Africa. Experts say the closure of the strait has had a major impact on countries bordering the Persian Gulf.
Many of the countries bordering the Persian Gulf are impacted because 85 to 90% of their needs for strategic and basic goods comes from this strait. Therefore, the impact is huge.
As the Suez Canal remains a key part of the route, Egypt has eased procedures for transit goods and utilised its logistics infrastructure to help reduce pressure caused by the Hormuz disruption.
We are working on relocating an entire production line from the GCC to Algeria. The route includes land transport through Saudi Arabia to Jordan, then using ferries to transport goods to Safaga port to create a multi-shipping model.
Experts estimate that the sharp increase in land transport demand combined with rising oil prices could push truck transport costs up by 120%, increasing the price of goods by between 20 and 40%.
The World Health Organization says it sent 4.7 tons of essential medical supplies to the Democratic Republic of Congo on Monday. The shipment comes after the United Nations declared the Ebola outbreak a public health emergency of international concern due to the high risk of the disease spreading beyond the country's borders. The outbreak is suspected to have killed around 136 people in recent weeks, with 8 cases confirmed through laboratory testing and 246 suspected cases reported in the eastern province of Ituri. Now heading back over to the West African part of the continent, and the Nigerian military has worked with the US to carry out air and ground operations against Islamic State militants in the country's northeast. The defense headquarters say 175 militants were killed in recent days. The military said the strikes destroyed Islamic State checkpoints, weapons stores and financial networks. Officials said the operations are part of an ongoing campaign against terrorism in the region. Travellers heading to Thailand may need to pay closer attention to a new set of rules coming in soon. Tourists will now have to apply for a visa if they wish to stay in Thailand for more than 30 days. Its government has approved a major revision of its visa exemption policies and are removing the 60-day stay program. It's in order to address security issues, misuse and illegal activities. The move completely scraps the 60-day visa exemption for 93 countries, including the US and UK. Now the changes take effect 15 days after it appears in Thailand's Royal News Gazette. Now over to Turkey, and the European Union and Turkey have reaffirmed their commitment to strengthening ties following a phone conversation between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. During the talks, the sides discussed Turkey's EU relations, regional developments and global issues. Von der Leyen described the discussions as productive and underlined Turkey's strategic importance, calling it a key partner in a tense region. The conversation also touched on the Iran issue, with appreciation expressed for Turkey's role in reducing tensions, supporting diplomatic efforts. A car bomb has exploded near Syria's Defense Ministry building in Damascus, killing 1 soldier and injuring at least 18 people, authorities said on Tuesday. According to military officials, the blast happened in the eastern part of the city while soldiers were trying to dismantle another explosive device found nearby. Head of Syria's Ambulance and Emergency Directorate told state news agency that the injured had been taken to hospital. No group has so far claimed responsibility for the attack. Turning to the World Urban Forum, and the background has changed, as you can see, but there has been a number of key panel discussions, and climate resilience has come up again in relation to a few things going on in a number of cities and communities across the Caspian region. Now, experts came together for talks on the future of urban development. Speakers focus on climate resilience, financing and regional partnerships, highlighting ways to support sustainable and people-centered cities. Several experts also shared their perspectives on the role of cooperation and innovation in building stronger communities.
In fact, an adaptation fund project that looks at strengthening the resilience of communities, strengthening biodiversity, livelihoods, but also looking at infrastructure pilot projects that can go to scale across the whole country and the wider region. So I have been working actually with the colleagues from UNEP, the Environmental Programme, and the International Organization of Migration on developing such a project for the Caspian Sea shore, but we are also aiming to actually use the experiences that we will be having here in Azerbaijan to go to scale in Kazakhstan and in Turkmenistan.
The first point is some of the basic infrastructure needs to be financed by the public sector. Let's say, for example, like roads, urban flood management systems, those do not generate revenue. But once those infrastructure is in place, some other infrastructure, let's say water supply systems, social housing, or wastewater systems, if you properly structure the projects, then it can be pursued for the public-private partnership arrangement. So once that enabling framework is in place, then in the future, the more private capital can come in to the climate-resilient urban infrastructure.
The project that we're working here is enabled by the Adaptation Fund, which has provided to Azerbaijan $10 million to implement the project around the climate resilience in the country. So we are envisaging, for instance, a corridor development project here in Baku to create public space, but also in the meanwhile to create a buffer area to better deal with emergencies such as urban flooding that we have witnessed. So eventually the ambition is to bring this project to another level and inspire other players in the region of the Caspian Sea, so that more countries can join this effort of creating climate resilience around the Caspian region.
There's so many great updates coming out of the World Urban Forum, and as it's being hosted in Baku, it's just a great experience to see so many people and experts and dignitaries come and share their ideas in relation to urban housing. But we'll definitely keep you updated throughout the course of the day with what's going on, plus the meeting with Xi Jinping and Putin and a number of other stories. So thank you so much for watching Daybreak with me today, Nadia Jani. I'll be back tomorrow to take you through the morning's top headlines. Take care.